Welcome to G Fun Facts Online. Take a look at your driver's license or passport. You'll likely see a small, single letter that's been a cornerstone of legal identity for decades, an M or an F. It seems so simple, so fundamental. But what if I told you that this little letter is a surprisingly recent invention, and its story is a global drama of fashion trends, hard-fought legal battles, and a complete reevaluation of what identity means? Today we're diving into the evolution of gender identification on legal documents. For most of human history, legal documents didn't explicitly state a person's gender. Early passports, for instance, relied on written physical descriptions and, eventually, photographs. If you look at a US passport from before the mid-1970s, you won't find a sex marker. So what changed? The answer, unexpectedly, is fashion. The 1970s saw the rise of androgynous hairstyles and clothing. Think David Bowie, Grace Jones, and the glam rock scene. This cultural shift made it increasingly difficult for border officials to look at a passport photo and visually determine if the person matched the he or she in their mind. The solution wasn't a deep philosophical one, it was purely practical. To avoid confusion at the border, the M and F markers were introduced. This practice became an international standard in 1980. The International Civil Aviation Organization, or ICAO, a UN agency, mandated that all passports include a sex marker. Crucially, the ICAO also allowed for an X designator for cases where the sex was unknown or unspecified. At the time, this was likely seen as a minor provision for rare cases. But as well, see that X would become hugely significant decades later. Around the same time, birth certificates standardized the practice of recording sex at birth. This was seen as a simple, biological, fact-checking exercise. But this rigid, binary categorization was about to collide with a powerful shift in societal understanding. The seeds of change were planted in the 1960s, as the fight for transgender rights began to enter the legal arena. Early activists started to legally question the idea that the sex assigned at birth was unchangeable. One of the first major attempts was a 1966 case in New York, known as MTR of Anonymous versus Weiner. A person who had undergone sex reassignment surgery petitioned to have the sex on their birth certificate changed. The court, however, denied the request. It ruled that the city's health code only allowed for changes if there was a clerical error made at the moment of birth. It was a setback, but the fight was far from over. The real breakthrough came nearly a decade later, in 1975, with a Connecticut case called Darnell versus Lloyd. This time, the court ruled that the state couldn't arbitrarily deny a change to a birth certificate. It needed to prove a substantial state interest, basically a very good reason, for refusing. This was a landmark decision. It established a legal precedent that your gender identity wasn't something the state could just ignore. Following this, states and countries slowly began to allow changes to gender markers. But it wasn't easy. The requirements were often invasive and expensive. Many jurisdictions demanded proof of gender-affirming surgery, hormone therapy, or a psychiatric diagnosis of gender identity disorder. This medicalized approach created huge barriers. It forced people to undergo procedures they might not have wanted or been able to afford, just to have their legal documents reflect who they are. This model, treating gender identity as a medical condition to be cured before it could be legally recognized, would dominate for decades. But as the 21st century began, the conversation started to shift again. The world was waking up to the fact that gender isn't a simple binary of male and female. Activists, scholars, and a growing number of people began to speak about non-binary, genderqueer, and third gender identities. A legal system limited to just M and F was, by its very nature, exclusionary. It legally erased the existence of anyone who didn't fit neatly into one of those two boxes. The pivotal moment for legal recognition beyond the binary came from Australia. In 2003, An intersex activist named Alex McFarlane used that obscure X marker provision from the 1980 ICAO guidelines to successfully obtain a passport that recognized them as neither male nor female. This was a world first and a groundbreaking achievement. It demonstrated that a legal pathway for non-binary recognition already existed within international standards. Australia later solidified this in 2011, officially allowing an X marker for both intersex and non-binary transgender individuals. Australia's move opened the floodgates. Let's look at the timeline of how this recognition spread. In 2007, the Supreme Court of Nepal established a third gender category, ordering that citizenship cards allow for this option based on self-identification, a truly progressive step. Pakistan's Supreme Court followed in 2009, adding a third gender option to its national database, issuing its first X passport in 2017. In the 2010s, the pace picked up. New Zealand began allowing X markers on passports in 2012. Bangladesh recognized the Hijra community as a third gender in 2013. India's Supreme Court followed suit in 2014, formally recognizing transgender and non-binary people as a third gender. Denmark also introduced a third gender option that year. Malta passed a comprehensive law in 2015, allowing for gender to be changed on official documents based on simple self-declaration, including an X option. Argentina has been a global leader. Its 2012 gender identity law was revolutionary, allowing changes to legal documents based on self-determination, without requiring any surgery or psychiatric evaluation. Then, in 2021, it became the first country in South America to explicitly include an X marker on all official documents. Canada began offering non-binary options on provincial documents in 2017, with gender-neutral X passports becoming available in 2019. Germany introduced a diverse gender option in 2018, which was expanded in 2024 to allow all adults to choose their gender marker based on self-declaration. The United States joined the list in 2022 when the federal government began offering an X gender marker on passports available through simple self-attestation. However, in a move that highlights the political fragility of these rights, this federal policy was reversed in early 2025. Despite this, many individual states continue to offer non-binary options on driver's licenses and birth certificates. This timeline reveals a clear global trend, but the reality on the ground is a patchwork of progress and persistent barriers. Let's take a quick tour around the world. In Europe, there's a stark divide. On one hand, you have countries like Belgium, Denmark, Finland, Germany, Iceland, Ireland, Malta, Spain, and Switzerland, which have moved towards legal gender recognition based on self-determination. This is often called the self-ID model. On the other hand, many other European nations still require a psychiatric diagnosis, or, in some cases, even forced sterilization to change one's legal gender. And countries like Hungary and Bulgaria offer no legal process for gender recognition at all. South America has seen remarkable progress, largely inspired by Argentina's model law and a 2018 ruling by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, which affirmed that gender identity is a protected right. Countries like Colombia, Ecuador, Uruguay, and Chile have all passed laws making it easier for people to align their legal documents with their identity. Asia is a mixed bag. Countries like Nepal, India, and Pakistan have legal recognition for a third gender, which is often rooted in the long cultural history of Hijra communities. But in many other parts of the continent, the hurdles are immense. In Japan and China, for example, changing your legal gender often requires undergoing gender-affirming surgery, a requirement many human rights groups condemn. Africa presents a complex picture. South Africa has had a relatively progressive law on the books since 2003. However, in many other African nations, the legal environment is hostile, often due to colonial-era laws that criminalize same-sex relationships and create a dangerous environment for gender-diverse people. This is a particularly bitter irony, as many pre-colonial African societies had much more fluid and accepting understandings of gender, which were systematically suppressed by European colonial rule. So we have this uneven global landscape. But what does it actually feel like to live with an X on your ID, or to navigate a world that demands an M or F when neither fits? For many non-binary and transgender people, having a legal document that accurately reflects their gender can be profoundly affirming. It's a validation from the state that says, "We see you, you exist." It can significantly alleviate the chronic stress and anxiety caused by being constantly misgendered by the documents you rely on for everyday life. However, the practical reality of living with a non-binary gender marker can be incredibly challenging in a world that is still overwhelmingly structured around a binary. Travel is one of the biggest sources of anxiety. While dozens of countries now issue X passports, many more do not recognize them. This can lead to serious problems at border crossings. Individuals report being subjected to invasive and humiliating questioning, being delayed for hours, or even being denied entry to a country. Imagine the fear of handing over your passport, not knowing if the person on the other side of the glass will understand, accept, or punish you for it. The challenges don't stop at the border. They permeate daily life. Think about all the forms you fill out for a job, for healthcare, for an apartment, for a bank account. Most of these systems and their databases are only designed to handle M or F. When confronted with an X, the system often breaks. This forces the individual into an impossible choice: lie and pick a binary option, effectively erasing their own identity, or try to explain their situation to a clerk who may be confused, untrained, or hostile. Personal accounts from non-binary people highlight this constant friction. Some express a deep-seated fear of being outed as transgender by their ID, and the potential for harassment or even violence that could follow. Others speak of a profound sense of exhaustion from the emotional labor of constantly having to explain their gender identity to strangers over and over again. It's the death by 1,000 paper cuts of administrative burden and social misunderstanding. This brings us to the future. The evolution of gender on legal documents is clearly far from over. The conversation is now shifting beyond just adding an X. Some advocates argue that a single X marker, while a necessary step, is still too limiting. It lumps a huge diversity of non-binary identities, from a gender to gender fluid to bigender, into a single monolithic category. A more radical and increasingly popular proposal is to remove gender markers from most forms of identification altogether. The argument is simple. In most day-to-day situations, is a person's gender really relevant information for the state or a business to have? We don't put our blood type or political affiliation on our driver's license. Why gender? Proponents of this idea, like in the Netherlands, which is moving to remove gender from national ID cards, argue that it would increase privacy, reduce discrimination, and simplify bureaucracy for everyone, not just for transgender and non-binary people. The legal and social landscape is in flux. The reversal of the X passport policy in the United States shows how quickly progress can be undone by political shifts. Yet, the global momentum is undeniably toward greater recognition and inclusivity. The legal battles fought in the 70s, the activism of people like Alex McFarland, and the countless personal stories of struggle and resilience are all pushing us toward a future where legal documents are a more accurate and respectful reflection of human identity. The journey is long and the path is not always straight, but the direction is toward a future where everyone can have an ID that is, finally, a true reflection of who they are. Thanks for tuning in to G Fun Facts Online.